We are back on the record at 12:59 p.m.
Would you raise your right hand, please, sir? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Will you please tell us your name?
James Stephen Sobek. Stephen is S-T-E-P-H-E-N.
Mr. Sobek, what do you do for a living?
I am an accident analyst working for Wolf Technical Services.
Are you a professional engineer?
I am.
Now, Mr. Sobek, I know many engineers specialize in particular areas of engineering. Do you specialize in any particular specialties in the field of engineering?
Yes, I do. Here in my work here, I specialize in optics, lighting, visibility, and digital photography.
One of the jury's jobs, in this case, Mr. Sobek, is to decide if Jason Taylor was keeping a careful lookout on the night of March 17th, 2012, when he struck Kenny Rickey. How is an optics, lighting, and visibility engineer helpful in a case like this?
The task of driving depends in great amounts on what you can see ahead. In fact, the National Safety Council has said that perhaps 90% or more of the information coming to the driver is obtained visually. There are some audio issues and other things like that, but it depends on what we see. And in a situation like this case, knowing what you can see or can't see depends on understanding the interactions of light in the world out here, the various light sources, headlights and lights at the car dealership, opposing cars, and all those various things, and how it will influence what the human observer can and cannot see.
We are here taking your trial testimony by way of a video. Are you aware that although you're testifying by video, your testimony is just as important as if you were testifying before a judge and jury?
Yes, sir, I am.
I want to talk a little bit about your background, Mr. Sobek. I want the jury to know your background and your qualifications to give conclusions in this case. I'm going to hand you what I'll mark as Exhibit 1. Is this a copy of your resume?
Yes, it is.
And would that be a current and up-to-date resume?
Yes, sir, it is.
Now, Mr. Sobek, can you tell us what you have done in your career that makes you qualified to give conclusions, in this case, in the area of lighting, optics, and visibility?
Starting as a youngster, I got involved in photography and optics, both taking photographs and also understanding telescopes and basically what you can see and what you can't see. I turned that into a small business while I was in high school, taking pictures for passports and all kinds of other things. And then when I went in the Navy, I carried that business with me. I became the ship's photographer while I was in the Navy, on board ship. And then I went to college and continued to do that same work there. And while I was there, I studied within the overall world of physics, getting my degree in physics. I studied optics very heavily. And in fact, I set up the first laser lab at Thiel College. Lasers were just then becoming available to the public. Once I got out of college...
Let me interrupt you, and I don't mean to date you, but what year did you graduate from Thiel College?
1968.
And what was the degree in which you obtaed from Thiel College?
Bachelor of Arts in Physics.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Minor in Math and Chemistry.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
When I was looking around for where I was going to work, I applied at 3 different places, and Naval Avionics Center here in Indianapolis, Indiana was one of them. They saw my background in photography and wanted to hire me because they were working on a project that involved aerial photographs and the use of them in missile guidance systems. For the next 20 years, I worked in that field, developing missile guidance systems, primarily working on a system that ultimately was put on board the Tomahawk cruise missile. It was an electro-optically based system and depended on using flash photography, television systems, and using aerial photographs obtained by various means for reference imagery. Having worked on that for quite some time, one of my coworkers was doing some part-time work for Wolf Technical Services, where I now work, And they would engage me every so often to look at questions involving lighting, visibility, what people could or could not see, and how far away they could see it, or what they might interpret it from that. I have, in 1988, after having received a number of offers from Wolf to come work for them, I finally just accepted and said, all right, I'll tender my resignation to the Navy, and I came to work for Wolf, and I've been here for almost 26 years now.
Are you licensed as an engineer?
I'm licensed as a professional engineer in the state of Indiana
And how long have you been licensed as a professional engineer?
since 1989.
Now, you mentioned Wolf Technical Services. What is your position with Wolf Technical Services?
I'm a senior accident analyst.
And what is Wolf Technical Services? What type of business?
We're an engineering company. We initially were formed basically to do forensic engineering, as it turned out. The first case involved metallurgy, which our founder, he was a metallurgist. But for the next 15 or so years, primarily what we did was investigations of incidents, collisions, fires, things like that, mostly forensic engineering. But about 6 years ago, the company began to investigate whether or not we would take advantage of a lot of our background. A lot of us came from the Navy and understood how the military systems work. And so we got involved in doing research and development work for the Navy, the Air Force, the Army. And at this point, the business has expanded to the point where it's more than half of our business. Probably 60% of our people and time is spent doing development systems for the military, such as an occupant restraint system for helicopters to keep people from falling out of helicopters when the doors are open. A system called Weigh in Motion, which detects the weight of vehicles on all four wheels and assists people in determining whether this vehicle has bombs on board of it. Is it a terrorist who's trying to gain access to a particular place? A whole variety of things that are based on the experience that each of us have brought to Wolf.
And you personally, do you do consulting work as an engineer personally for the United States government?
I do. Several years ago, I was contacted by an individual out in Arizona, asked me whether or not I was, in fact, the James Sobek, and I thought, yeah. The one who developed the guidance system for Tomahawk? Oh, yeah. Well, they wanted to retain me. They were doing a contract for the CIA to develop parafoils that would land surreptitiously on the bad guys' homes or buildings. And they needed a guidance system that would be similar to what my guidance system for Tomahawk was. And so I worked with them to tell them about cameras and lighting levels and reference imagery to do that.
Do you also do some teaching as a professional engineer?
Yes. In 2007, having been asked a number of times by various police agencies around the country whether or not I could teach them the optics, lighting, and visibility issues that I use in my own cases, I started a business called Clearly Visible Presentations. And since then, I have been teaching classes to engineering people, police officers, other individuals who are interested in the kind of work we do here. And in fact, I have one of those cases coming up next week in Nevada, or classes rather.
So you consult for both the United States government and local governments.
Yes,
Do you also consult with attorneys?
I do.
Do you also consult with insurance companies?
Yes, sir.
Does it matter to you, Mr. Sobek, which side retains your services as an expert in the area of engineering when you're doing your analysis?
It does not. Our goal is to understand what happened and what the issues were, and it doesn't matter who we're working for. The answer ends up being the same. It may be more favorable to one side or the other, but it's going to be the same answer.
In each case you're retained to do these engineering services, do you give your professional, unbiased conclusions?
Yes, sir.
And did I tell you in analyzing this case that I wanted your professional, unbiased conclusions?
You did.
Can you tell us how many times over your career that you have been recognized as an engineering expert in a court of law?
It's about 120 times now.
Over 25 years?
Since 1989, actually 1988.
Now, Mr. Sobek, in this case involving Jason Taylor and Kenny Rickey and Allison Hoskins, have you carefully analyzed the information about the collision involving Jason Taylor's SUV hitting Kenny Rickey on Interstate 44 from an engineering standpoint?
Yes, sir.
And have you carefully analyzed the collision?
Objection, leading.
Have you carefully analyzed the collision from a lighting, optics, and visibility standpoint?
I have.
And tell us, what is it you have reviewed and what have you done to analyze this case to form conclusions?
Once I had been apprised that this incident happened, I asked for a copy of the police report to be sent to me, and I did look at that and understood where it took place, when the incident took place, and immediately went to understand more about the locale by going to Google Earth and looking at aerial photography and then their street view photography. I understood what the general road profile was. As it turned out, I had already been down that road several times working on a previous case on I-44. I asked for and received copies of the police photographs taken at the collision scene, and I also received subsequent daytime photographs that someone had taken out at the scene that showed basically the layout that one would perceive if you were there in the daytime. I received a statement that Ms. Haskins provided. I went and discovered what the weather conditions were at the time of the incident, in addition to what was noted on the police report. I looked at satellite imagery for the cloud cover in the state of Missouri and particularly over Joplin at the time just before the incident happened. I did computations for the position of the sun. It had passed sunset. It was getting dark out, but I was able to compute where the sun was and based on the sky conditions to understand what the remaining light level would have been from the bright sky in the west as it was finally getting completely dark.
Did you look at the deposition testimony that was given by Jason Taylor in this case?
I did, yes.
Okay. Did you have someone through Wolf Technical, did someone go out and actually view the scene where the collision occurred and take video and photographs for you also?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The person that went to the scene, that was not you, was it?
It was not me. I sent Allison Tharp. She is an optical engineer who, before coming to us, had worked for Sylvania Vallejo, designing headlights and other lighting systems for automobiles. And she's well versed in the vision capability of humans and what it takes to light the road up to be able to see things ahead and what the various lighting patterns will be from both low beam and high beam headlights.
And is it common when you're working on a case or being a consultant that it will be approached as a group effort from the engineers here at Wolf Technical?
Yes.
Okay. And the information that Allison Thought collected and that she provided by way of the video and the photographs, is that reliable to you in forming the conclusions that you formed in this case?
It is.
Okay. And do you feel that you have sufficient information in order to form professional conclusions in this case?
I do.
And have you in fact formed conclusions after you reviewed all the information you just listed for us?
Yes, sir, I have.
Now, Mr. Hoskins, I'm sorry. Now, Mr. Sobek, can we be assured that in forming your conclusions that you are using reliable engineering and scientific principles?
You may.
And can we be assured that the conclusions you have made are made to a reasonable degree of engineering and scientific certainty?
Yes, sir, you can.
Okay. What I want you to do, Mr. Sobek, is explain to us the conclusions you have made in this case. And have I asked you to write them down and list them for me in some sort of an exhibit?
You have, and I have done that.
I want to mark as Exhibit 2 that exhibit Mr. Sobek, does Exhibit 2 state the conclusions that you have made in this case?
And I will object that there's lack of foundation for these conclusions.
Exhibit 2 does state the opinions that I formed in this case.
Now, what I want to do, Mr. Sobek, is I want you to go through each one of these conclusions and have you explain the basis for each conclusion. And I have a statement here with a yes, no to the right, and I want you to tell us if each is your conclusion in this case. Do you have a pen that you can use?
I do. I might want to get a marker so it shows up a little bit better.
Is there one in the case behind you?
Yeah.
Do you want me to object for lack of foundation on each one, or do you want that to be a continuing objection?
Well, he's going to give the foundation for each one as we go through them. It's based upon all the information he reviewed. Now, Mr. Sobek, are each of these conclusions based upon your education, training, and experience as a professional engineer, and specifically a specialist in the area of lighting, optics, lighting, and visibility?
Yes, sir, they are.
Okay. And are these conclusions based upon your review of all of the information that you have looked at in this case?
Yes.
And I object that there's lack of foundation, but go ahead.
Number one, Kenny Rickey and Allison Haskins were noticeable to a westbound driver from a distance of 530 feet. Is that your conclusion?
That is my conclusion.
Could you please check a yes next to that? Now, Mr. Sobek, I want you to explain this to us. And first, you use the word noticeable. Does that term noticeable have particular importance in the area of engineering?
They do in my field as I approach this field, because I break my world into 4 different visibility conditions.
Can you explain to us what the 4 different visibility conditions are, and specifically what noticeable means?
Yes, sir. Question is always often asked of me, is something visible? The first phase that I look at is if there is an object to be seen someplace and it has no light or insufficient light and insufficient contrast and has no properties that cause it to change within the human viewer's field of view, then we would describe it as being invisible. And when I mean invisible, I mean that no matter how long I tell you to look and give you cues as to what's out there that you are searching for, neither you nor I will be able to see it because it doesn't provide sufficient light, contrast, or change. That's invisible. If, for example, it's getting light out, the sun's going to come up and the lighting conditions begin to improve a little bit, and finally there's enough light and contrast that you can identify where that object is and it's what we've been trying to search for, then it has reached the stage of being visible. That doesn't mean that it's blatantly so, it's just visible, and you might turn to me and say, oh, are we talking about that thing that's just to the left of that tree and looks like it's maybe white on the bottom and black on the top? And I would say yes. All right, I see it. But you probably would also say, I wouldn't have noticed it if you hadn't pointed it out to me, which is the 3rd phase. It's noticeable. And without instruction or any kind of guidance, you would notice that it's there and you would understand what it is. Finally, the 4th phase is conspicuous. Something is blatantly obvious. No one could fail to notice it. It is so obvious that it will draw your attention to it and only it. And I have sometimes described that by reference to the red and white tape that's on the side of semi-trailers these days. It's called conspicuity tape. And when that was first coming out and I was describing it to various people and doing talks on that subject, I used the phrase that you are conspicuous if you're walking down the aisle at a wedding wearing a cat in the hat. That's a red and white hat that most youngsters are familiar with and adults who have had to read the books to the youngsters. And I chose the red and white hat because of the red and white tape. Noticeable means that in this situation, as in my conclusion number 1, is that without guidance from somebody else, oh look at those people that are going across the road, Mr. Taylor should have been able to see them out on the road on his own without extra guidance.
So to repeat your definition of noticeable, to make sure I'm clear, noticeable means that without instruction or guidance, an object is noticeable and the person knows what it is.
That's right, it's understandable.
Can you please explain to us what is the basis for your conclusion that Kenny Rickey and Allison Haskins were noticeable to a westbound driver from a distance of 530 feet?
Yes, it's based on part of the dynamics of this collision. Two things. Ms. Haskins and Mr. Rickey were walking across the road, and the description that I have about their walking speed is that they were walking briskly across the highway.
Let me stop you there just for 1 second. We don't have Ms. Haskins' deposition in this case yet, but I want you to assume that she and Mr. Rickey were walking towards Interstate 44, and first they crossed the eastbound double set of lanes, and then they crossed the median, and as they approached the double set of westbound lanes, they looked and they saw cars were far enough away that they had plenty of time to make it safely across the road without any problems. So they began to walk across the asphalt, which is the shoulder, and the double set of lanes, and they walked at a fast pace. They weren't running because the cars were far enough back that they didn't feel they need to run. Assuming that, go ahead and, is that the assumption that you made in this case?
That is.
Objection calls for facts not, assumes facts not in evidence.
Assuming those stated facts, go ahead and give us the basis for your conclusion, number 1.
By using the word fast pace, that typically, it's well researched at about walking speeds, and I would assign a walking speed of about 5 feet per second as being a fast pace. That's not running, and it's not just moseying along. 5 feet per second is one of the facts. The next fact is the lanes on an interstate highway are typically about 12 feet wide. And there is a shoulder on the southern side of the westbound lanes. It's about 2.5 to 3 feet wide. And then there's another shoulder on the north side that's all a full 10 to 12 feet wide there, but they didn't make it there apparently. So they've had to cover 2 12-foot lanes, 24 feet, plus another 3 feet or so. And at 5 feet per second, it's going to take them about 5 seconds to get across all 3 of those lanes at a fast pace. At the same time, Mr. Taylor has testified that he's approaching the site. He's set his cruise control and he's operating at 69 or 70 miles per hour, which is just over 100 feet per second. So 5 seconds for him to reach the site and 5 seconds for the pedestrians to reach the same point. 5 seconds for him puts him out about 530 feet away, maybe a little less than that, a little more, but about 530 feet from the point of impact. That's the time that they have begun to move, at the start of this, they've begun to move across the yellow retroreflective line on the south side of the westbound lanes. Because it's retroreflective, and because those retroreflective lines will be seen by a motorist traveling down the road with his headlights on, at a distance of 550 to 600 feet out from his car, the pedestrians' bodies will eclipse or pass in front of and be seen in silhouette against that yellow line. In addition, they are going to be seen in silhouette against eastbound traffic, which Mr. Taylor says there was. There were several eastbound cars coming. So there's something.
Assumes facts not in evidence.
There's something passing in front of the yellow line. There's something passing in front of the headlights from the eastbound car or cars. And finally, in the median between the eastbound and westbound lanes, there is a guide rail, a cable guide rail that has yellow retroreflectors on it. They are passing in front of those. And the perception from a westbound driver's point of view is that these lights are going on and coming off. Something's moving in front of those, turning them on and turning them off and then turning them back on. That is sufficient to draw your attention toward those lights. So at that point, 530 feet away, he can already begin to notice that there's something out there moving toward his lanes of travel.
You have given us a lot of information. Let me ask you a little bit about some of that. First of all, what do you know, based upon the information you reviewed, about the area on Mr. Taylor's vehicle and where it hit Kenny Rickey?
The police, when they arrived at the scene, photographed Mr. Taylor's vehicle. And the damage pattern is clearly at the right front headlight, the right headlamp, and on the hood, on the A-pillar, and on the car's radio antenna on the right side, and the passenger side mirror, indicating that Mr. Rickey was struck by the right front corner of the vehicle. Basically, the right front headlight is what ran into him.
Do you have a photograph that the police took that will show that?
Yes, I do.
And you're showing us on the computer?
Yes.
Okay. Judy, is it okay if he shows us on the computer, because that way we're not losing as much contrast if they're actually printed? We can print them and make a paper file for the record if you want, but for purposes of showing them on the computer, we're not going to get the washout that you get when you print them out.
That's fine, as long as they're printed so we have them for record.
Yeah, that's fine.
This is photograph number 100, underline 0379, taken by the police on March 17th of 2012.
And can you show us that on the video?
Yes.
Okay. Are you pick that up okay? Go ahead and show us the area of the damage that you understand is the location where the Taylor vehicle hit Mr. Rickey.
This region on the right side or passenger side bumper, the headlamp itself, and the hood all the way up to the windshield. Although the windshield did not shatter, the car's antenna is bent to the right and the passenger side mirror has been damaged, indicating that Mr. Rickey ultimately came off the passenger side of the vehicle and went to the ground behind the vehicle as it passed on by.
Thank you. Next, let me ask you about visibility. First of all, you said you looked at some weather reports. What did you find out about the weather on the night in question?
There was a period of time where it was cloudy, and then just before the accident, the weather report from weatherunderground.com shows it being clear, and then it finally goes to cloudy or overcast and then cloudy again. In addition, I looked at the weather satellite photographs. There's a system that's maintained up at the University of Wisconsin, the Space Science Engineering Center, and they are the archive for satellite images that we see on the evening weather reports when we're watching television. I went to the date and time and location of this accident. Because it's dark out, the clouds are no longer being illuminated by the sun directly overhead, so I had to go to about an hour prior to that to get the last conditions that I could see those. There was a band of clear skies over southern Missouri that shows up in that, and I don't know if I printed it out in my file, but there is a photograph in my data that shows that weather satellite image. That's consistent with what the weather report shows in the written text. In addition, as I said, I calculated the position of the sun to know how much sky would be illuminated to the west and how much light we would be getting on the ground.
And was any of the sky illuminated to the west?
Yes, it would be a band essentially above the highway, because on that date the sun would have set almost due west. It's proceeding north because we're getting up to March 21st when it will set exactly due west. We're going slightly southwest, but that western sky above the highway will be glowing dimly, not uncomfortably bright, but it'll still be noticeably brighter than the road surface and the trees. What that means is, in addition to there being a bright sky, there will be light reflected off the pavement The pavement is a mirror, albeit a very poor quality mirror, but it will have a slight glow to it against which things will appear in silhouette.
So would it be fair to say the road conditions weather-wise were clear?
Yes?
And were the road conditions dry?
Yes, they were.
Now I want to talk to you a little bit about lighting conditions. What can you tell us about the lighting conditions out there on Interstate 44 where the collision occurred that supports your conclusion that Kenny, Ricky, and Allison Haskins were noticeable to a westbound driver from a distance of at least 530 feet?
First of all, we have the car operating on its own headlights. Secondly, we have eastbound cars operating with their headlights. Third, and very important in this case, is on the north side of the road, there is a car dealership with a long string of lights or lamps or luminaires, they're called, illuminating the sales lot and the backs of the car dealership's building. Those lamps are a white color light source known as metal halide, H-A-L-I-D-E lamps. That string primarily is illuminating the car parking lot, but it is also splashing light off the backs of the building, and each lens is slightly visible in the police photographs. In fact, this same photograph that I have up right here shows some of those lights.
Can you show us some of those lights in that photograph, which is Exhibit 3? And do you have any other photographs that the police took that would also show those lights?
I do.
First, show us on Exhibit 3, please.
Exhibit 3, we're looking back to the east, and on the left side of the image, there are 6 of those luminaires. But there are many more further to the west.
Okay. And then let's mark as Exhibit 4, and you can show us however many you want to that the police took, but let's mark as Exhibit 4 the first photograph that shows the lights from the car dealership.
This is photograph 100 underline 0376 from the police series. And on the right side of the image now, there are...
This is going the opposite direction. This
Yes.
is going westbound, the
Yep.
direction that Mr. Taylor was traveling.
That's correct.
Okay, please go ahead.
And over here on the right-hand side of the image now, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and there are probably at least another 10 further off the image to the right-hand side.
Okay, and I interrupted you so we could get those photographs, but go ahead and explain to us
Now,
what it is about those photographs that support your conclusion number 1.
The first thing we see here is that the lens itself is visible at the top of the lamp, and then the individual structures on the post are illuminated by the light, the lenses. They illuminate the post. A little bit of light bounces off each post out onto the road. The fact that we can see them in the photograph means that light arrived at our position. Now, I've locked, okay. I want to pull up one more photograph that shows the building. This is photograph 100 underline 0358, and it is taken at a position just east of milepost 10.4, which shows here, and the Range Line Road sign. And to the right-hand side, we can see this building that is reflecting light out to the viewer. All of these lights are illuminating the road surface and the shoulder because of what's called spill. They spill light onto the pavement. Their primary function is to illuminate the parking lot, but they do in fact spill light out onto the roadway.
Now, Jason Taylor testified in his deposition that the lights from the car dealership are bright. Do you agree with that?
I would use the term intense, but that is a term. They are definitely intense lamps, but not so much so as if you were in the parking lot and happened to look up at those lights. They would be uncomfortably intense at that point. From the highway, they are not uncomfortably intense.
The brightness of those lights, would they obstruct or obscure or diminish the vision of a driver headed in the westbound direction?
Objection calls for speculation.
as you ask the question, that's a comparative question, they would diminish it ever so slightly, but not noticeably. They do not present a problem for westbound drivers.
Thank you. Now, have you told us about the lighting from the car dealership that supports conclusion number 1?
That's part of it, yes.
Okay. You also started to tell us earlier about headlights for the vehicles traveling in the eastbound direction.
That's correct.
Tell us about that.
When you are operating a motor vehicle at night on a roadway and you see another vehicle coming toward you on the highway, you will notice its headlights. You will notice maybe marker lights also. But in addition, if you look directly below the 2 headlamps illuminating their road, you will see 2 long white smears of light, which are in fact a reflection of that headlamp off the pavement. If I think we can, I guess maybe we can do a drawing that I put up here. I've created a drawing from the perspective of a westbound motorist.
So what are we looking at here? It looks like we have, what, the westbound lane?
Westbound lane, range line road sign in green. There's a tall sign advertising Honda. There's a string of these metal halide lamps, and they're actually probably a little too high as I've drawn them here. And then there are white line, dashed white line, a yellow line here. These little red dots are reflectors that are on the cable guide rail between the 2 eastbound and westbound lanes. This is a horizon line. And finally, we have the eastbound lanes. Now, I've represented 2 dots here that are the headlamps of some car coming toward us. But in addition to that, there will be some reflection off of these, off the pavement. And you may not notice it if it gets into the grass, but the pavement will recover it. Headlights out here will in fact be reflected off the westbound lanes of pavement. And I have some police photographs that show that there's a picture taken looking west, but there are eastbound vehicles in the picture, and they show this reflection. What they end up doing is lighting up the pavement surface. For each car that's out here, you get a corresponding set of reflections down here in the westbound lanes.
Can I just stop you for a second and have you show us the photograph that you referred to from the police?
Yes. This is photograph number 100-0376. And first of all, we see the lamps from the car dealership. We also see the shoulder, the white line, the dash line, and there are some eastbound vehicles coming with their headlights on. Now I'm going to zoom in on that. And for reference, I've drawn a box, and we're going to zoom this box larger.
Okay.
Now what we see is that the westbound lane has features that are shown up here, the reflections of these eastbound motor vehicles' headlights in the westbound travel lane. And in fact, in this photograph, one can see the tires of this westbound vehicle, I think it's an SUV, silhouetted against this bright surface. You can see all 4 tires, one here, one here, one here, and one here, that are seen in silhouette against that lighted surface. If there were a person standing on the road or walking in the road, they would be passing in front of these reflections from the eastbound car's headlights. So there's going to be a dark object moving across the road in the westbound inside lane.
Okay. And I interrupted you. Thank you for showing us that photograph. And we return to your illustration up on the board.
So if we were to put a person here, here's a reflection that would be there. But if I put a person here now going across the road, they functionally silhouette that out. So the road surface everywhere else is still light, but there's something passing in front of those. Likewise, all of these are retroreflectors, or what's called reflex reflectors, not unlike what you have on the back of your bicycle, the little red reflector on the back of the bicycle or the white one on the front. They're amber reflectors, and they're mounted on the guide rail to let drivers know if they get down there, they're about to hit something. In walking across the road, the people will in fact block or occlude, or the term I use is eclipse, each of those lights. These lights will go off and then they'll come back on. And they will go off and come back on in a sequence that starts left and moves to the right as they block each one of those.
Now, did you see in the deposition of Jason Taylor where he testified that the car dealership lights and the headlights from eastbound traffic make it difficult to see? Did you find any evidence of that?
I understand what he's saying, but in fact they improve your ability to see someone on the westbound lanes because they block these silhouettes, these reflections off the pavement.
Okay. What else would support your conclusion that Kenny, Ricky, and Allison Haskins were noticeable to a westbound driver from a distance of 530 feet?
I mentioned earlier that there are retroreflective lines on the pavement. Reflective lines, some people might understand them, but the proper term is retroreflective, meaning that they send light back to the light source. This yellow line, these white dash lines, this white line are all retroreflective. And your headlights will allow you to see those out to around 550 or 600 feet away from the car. As they walk across these lines, as I've drawn it right now in fact, this yellow line is being blocked by that blue object. You can't see the return from it anymore. And it will move until it gets into the center of the lane. That line will not be completely visible. It won't be continuous. As they continue across the road, they will pass in front of the white dash lines. And some of those dash lines, which will be visible to a westbound motorist, will go out. And then they'll come back on again, as if something had moved in front of them, which is in fact exactly what's happened. Then as they get into this center lane, they've only got another 12 and then less feet to get over here. At that time, Mr. Taylor's car is getting quite close. But prior to that, they have made themselves known by blocking out all these various lights. Now, in addition, the string of lights here on the roadway are spilling enough light onto the road to make the pedestrians completely visible, independent of all of these reflectors.
And is that the lights from the car dealership you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay. So just the lights from the car dealership independently reflect enough light to make the pedestrians visible to someone traveling in the westbound direction.
That's correct. Now, what they'll probably appear at, if you were to suddenly take away all these retroreflective lines, all the retroreflectors, and all the active cars from the other side, and just leave these lights on, you would now see two persons that are presented as lighter objects against the black background.
Objection calls for speculation, lack of foundation.
And why is it they would appear lighter against a black background?
Because these lights will supply enough light onto the pavement to stimulate the human vision, both in the direction that he should be looking. If he's driving down the road, he will be operating primarily on what are known as cones. In the center of your field of view, your sensors in your eye are sensitive to light, and the very central portion, the center 5 degrees or so, are primarily color sensors. They're not very sensitive, but there'll be enough light from here to trigger those color sensors. They will also produce enough light to give you color sensation.
And the he you're referring to is Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
Okay. But then on top of that, the headlights from the eastbound direction and the retro-reflective lines in the road further increase the noticeability of pedestrians.
That's
Objection
correct.
calls for speculation, lack of foundation.
Go ahead and answer.
And finally,
I'm sorry, go ahead and answer that.
They do. And the final element here is, well, not quite the final. I mentioned that the sky is glowing somewhat in the west. It hasn't gotten completely dark there. That glow, and if I can use green, I think, yeah, let's use blue. A dim blue sky over in this direction will in fact be producing a slight bluish gloss to the pavement. And a person walking across that road will be seen again in silhouette against that gloss. So you're going to have dark objects that are blocking out that lighter colored pavement. It won't be really, really bright, but it will be noticeable.
Okay. So those two dark objects, those two black lines, those represent
Pedestrians.
pedestrians crossing the road. Okay.
Yep.
Objection calls for speculation like a foundation.
Now, they've already, at least Mr. Ricky has gotten himself all the way across this section of roadway because the information is that he was close to the white line when he was struck.
What white line?
The retroreflective white line on the north side of the westbound lanes.
Okay.
And we know from Mr. Taylor's deposition testimony that he was driving west in the right-hand lane, and he said that he tends to say bias toward the right white line. So his vehicle is over here near this right white line when he makes contact with Mr. Haskins, or Mr. Ricky. And therefore, at the last second or so of travel, Mr. Ricky is now blocking access to the white retroreflective line here. His body is in silhouette against that line, continuing to move to the north. So they've passed by yellow reflectors, yellow line, white dash line, cut off headlamps from eastbound traffic, and the reflection from those eastbound traffic headlamps, and then finally the white line. By this later portion, Mr. Taylor's low beam headlamps are going to now be illuminating the feet and legs of Mr. Ricky's body. And yet, with all of these visual cues, Mr. Taylor says that he didn't see anything all the way through the point of impact.
Okay. Thank you for that. If we can go back to exhibit number 2 there. Why don't you move that a little closer to you if you can,
Yep.
so the light hits it. Thank you so much. Moving on to conclusion number 2.
If we can stop here for just a second, are we going to have a problem at trial if the judge decides to not use some of these conclusions by having this up to the whole thing?
I don't know. I don't know why they would be excluded, but
Well, I'm just
okay.
I was just thinking ahead.
We'll go ahead and he'll go through it, then we can move it off to the side, and then you
Okay.
can talk about them, okay? So, Mr. Sobek, turning to conclusion number 2, at 69.5 miles per hour, Kenny Ricky and Allison Hoskins were noticeable to a westbound driver for 5.5 seconds before impact. Is that one of your conclusions?
It is.
And I object that it calls for speculation and lack of foundation.
Slide that over. Can you go ahead and check that?
Yes.
Okay, can you just slide it over? No, okay. Thank you. Mr. Sobek, can you explain to us the basis for your conclusion that at 69.5 miles per hour, first of all, where did you get that number?
69.5 miles an hour is the average about what Mr. Taylor said he was traveling at. He said he'd set his cruise control at either 69 or 70 miles per hour. Posted speed limit out there is 70 miles an hour. And so I've taken the average between those two at 69.5.
So what's the basis for your conclusion that at that speed, Kenny Ricky and Allison Hoskins were noticeable to a westbound driver for 5.5 seconds before impact?
It's based on the fact that when they start across the road and walk at the speed that we spoke of before, about 5 feet per second, they will already be eclipsing lights in the background, passing in front of various lighted surfaces. So during the 5 to 5.5 seconds that they start moving across the road, both Kenny Rickey and Allison Hoskins are in Mr. Taylor's field of view. He has no one traveling in front of him, according to his testimony. He is aware that there was somebody behind him. So there's nothing to block the field of view from his perspective in the right-hand westbound lane to the lane markings ahead of him and to the cars coming east toward him and all of the retroreflectors that are in between those two angular viewpoints.
So you explained to us part of the equation is that it would take about 5.5 seconds for Mr. Rickey and Ms. Haskins to cross the roadway.
Yes.
How long at 69.5 miles per hour is it going to take for Mr. Taylor to get from approximately 530 feet back to the area of impact? How did you come up with that?
Hang on a second while I pull up the exact conversion for 69.5 miles an hour. It's about 100 plus feet per second, but I want to get the exact number.
Mr. Martucci, we have about 10 minutes left on the tape.
69.5 miles an hour is 101.93 feet per second. If it takes 5.5 seconds for the couple to go across the road, then at the start of that time they are creating visual cues about their presence and motion. Taking that 101.93 and multiplying it by 5.5 seconds means that at 560 feet out, the vehicle is coming. It's going to take a period of time for Mr. Taylor to recognize that something's moving onto the road. So being conservative, I brought that down to 530 feet.
Okay. We're going to take a break and let him change tapes. We're going to pick up for the basis of your opinion.
This marks the end of videotape 2 and the deposition of James Sobek. We're off the record at 1:52 p.m. This marks the beginning of videotape number 3 and the deposition of James Sobek. We're back on the record at 1:57 p.m.
Mr. Sobek, are you done telling us the basis for your conclusion for number 2?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay. Let's move to number 3. The conclusion reads, Jason Taylor had ample notice that Kenny Rickey and Allison Haskins were crossing the roadway. Do you agree with that or disagree?
I do agree with that.
Will you please check yes or no?
I will.
And now, Mr. Sobek, will you please explain to us the basis for your opinion that Jason Taylor had ample notice that Kenny Rickey and Allison Haskins were crossing the roadway?
Basis basically is the summary of what we got to these numbers here and the time here. When you're 5.5 seconds away from something on the roadway, you can do all kinds of things to see what the situation is ahead of you. You can light it up more, you can slow down. This is not yet any kind of an emergency situation. There's something going on the roadway that I need to pay attention to, and I've had ample information based on all these optical things that are going on to investigate it further.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to number 4, it reads, it would have taken 1/2 second for Jason Taylor to steer his vehicle to the left and avoid striking Kenny Rickey and Allison Haskins. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
I do agree with that.
Will you please check the board accordingly? Now, Mr. Sobek, can you please explain to us the basis for the opinion that it would have taken 1/2 second for Jason Taylor to steer his vehicle to the left and avoid striking Kenny Rickey and Allison Haskins?
Referencing the photograph that I showed earlier with the damage on the right-hand side of the car,
That is photograph number, I believe it's 2, but let me double check.
it's number 379.
Yes, exhibit number 3. Go ahead.
In order to avoid impact, all Mr. Taylor would have had to do is move sufficiently far left, or not even move left, but change the direction of his vehicle so that when he arrives at where the two pedestrians are, he now passes behind them functionally, or to, from his perspective, to the left side of where they are. And looking at the photograph, it looks to me like perhaps 2 feet would have accomplished it. Not even the mirror would have struck them.
Okay. You're showing us now Exhibit 3 again.
Yes.
Okay.
And contact is deepest in the center of Mr. Taylor's, or Mr. Ricky's body is in this deepest portion of the depression here. So measuring from there to the side, we get about 2 feet, maybe just a little bit more, to clear the mirror and all parts of the car. In order to do that, he does not have to move the car to the left 2 feet. All he has to do is ensure that his steering angle is to the left such that he passes by and doesn't strike them. Now for this discussion, I haven't even considered the fact that they're moving to the north most likely, and during that time that he's approaching on that last portion, they will also move to the right. For this discussion, it's just assuming that they were stationary at that point.
Now, Mr. Taylor testified in his deposition that when he drives, he tends to favor or go towards the fog line on the right.
Yes.
Are we talking about a swerve, an abrupt turn, or what are we talking about for him to move his vehicle just sufficiently to avoid any contact with the pedestrians?
If he is aware of these visual cues that start out here when he's 530 feet away, it will not be a violent swerve. It'll be just an adjustment. Ease yourself over to the left so that you don't pass by where they are.
Would he even have to go into the fast lane or passing lane, whatever terminology you choose? Would he even have to go into that lane to avoid
No, not
this?
at all. Those lanes are 12 feet wide and his vehicle is only about 6 feet wide. So the right side of his mirror, based on what I understand his description to be, would be basically over the white line, somewhere in that region. To move over just the width of his vehicle so that the left mirror now, driver's side mirror, is over the dash line, he's given them nearly 6 feet of space on the right-hand side of his vehicle.
Okay. Moving on to conclusion number 5, it reads, Jason Taylor had plenty of time to avoid striking Kenny, Ricky, and Allison Haskins.
I object to the conclusion. It invades the province of the jury, and it lacks foundation.
Moving to conclusion number 5, where it says, Jason Taylor had plenty of time to avoid striking Kenny, Ricky, and Allison Haskins. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
I do agree with that.
Okay. Can you please check the board accordingly? Now, Mr. Sobek, can you explain to us the basis for your opinion that Jason Taylor had plenty of time to avoid striking Kenny, Ricky, and Allison Haskins?
Objection, invades the province of the jury, lacks foundation.
Go ahead.
The time period that we have been speaking about is 5.5 seconds. A typical lane maneuver, not violent, just deciding I'm going to change lanes, go from the through lane to the passing lane, will take 4 seconds. And the lateral acceleration necessary to do that, we characterize that in the accident reconstruction business as the number of G's, the acceleration necessary. Very benign, 1/10 G will move you into the next lane, and it will take you 4 seconds to do that. Your car can do a lot more acceleration to the left than you typically use when you change lanes. You can get up to a skilled driver, but not a race driver, can easily get 0.5 to 0.6 G's out of his car and not lose control of it. Mr. Taylor could have changed lanes. He could have just shifted to the left. He has all kinds of times to see what's out in front of him, to recognize what it is, and make the appropriate travel change in his path. He doesn't have to go into the left-hand lane. All he has to do is steer to the left and avoid striking them.
So putting that all together, from 530 feet, which you used as a conservative basis, you say it's actually 560, but you gave him a little bit of ways to
Yes.
530? Okay.
Yes.
So starting at 530 feet, he has to perceive that there's something in the roadway, decide what he's going to do and react, and then actually make the reaction and move his vehicle. Is he able to do all that within the 5.5 seconds?
Oh, yes.
Objection, lacks the foundation, calls for speculation, invades the
Hold on,
province of the jury.
Hold on, let me ask it. Is he able to do that from a physics and engineering standpoint within 5.5 seconds?
Invades the province of the jury, lack of foundation.
Yes, he is.
Okay.
The actual maneuver to just avoid striking them only takes literally 1/2 of a second to shift the direction of travel. The remaining portion of this 5.5, 5 total seconds, is more than necessary to do a complete lane change. He can also slow down, do any number of other things that will not result in striking the pedestrians. He's got plenty of visibility distance and plenty of time to make those adjustments.
And this is just with him having his low beams on?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, I want you to assume that we have an instruction in Missouri that says a driver of a vehicle on the roadway has to keep a careful lookout. I want to ask you about conclusion 6, and it reads, Jason Taylor's failure to see Kenny Rickey and Allison Haskins all the way through impact means he was not keeping a careful lookout. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I object to the question and to the conclusion as invading the province of the jury, lacking foundation, and being based upon speculation.
Let me restate it subject to her objection. Looking at conclusion 6, it reads, Jason Taylor's failure to see Kenny Rickey and Allison Haskins all the way through impact means he was not keeping a careful lookout. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
I do.
Can you please check
I
that?
agree.
Please check that accordingly. Now, you saw Mr. Taylor's testimony where he said he did not see Kenny Rickey or Allison Haskins all the way through impact. Did you see that?
I did see that.
Okay. And in fact, he did not even realize he'd hit anything until the right side of his car exploded, as he described?
I think blew up was the term he used.
Okay. Explain to us the basis for conclusion 6, that he was not keeping a careful lookout.
Objection, invades province of the jury.
Go ahead.
My basis is the fact that with all of these visual cues early on, Mr. Taylor, in my opinion, should have known that there were objects on the road. His attention should have been directed toward those objects to see what they were. But as he gets closer, and finally the low beam headlamps begin to make the pattern works its way up the legs of either both pedestrians or at least Mr. Rickey, he will have been able to confirm that it is a person or persons that are in front of his car that he's about to strike.
Is that what you referred to earlier as they are now conspicuous?
Yes.
Okay, so at some point they would become conspicuous.
Yes, as persons.
Okay.
And when people strike objects like this that they have not noticed, perhaps it's complete darkness, they still know what it was they struck. You run into a raccoon, you know that you just had a raccoon. You see a person and you hit them, and you realize that you've hit them. There's no way, if he is keeping a careful lookout, that he will not be able to see that there is one person and perhaps two persons in front of his car. The only reason I say perhaps two is because Ms. Hoskins may in fact be occluded from his view by being directly alongside of Mr. Rickey's position.
I asked you when they went from noticeable to being conspicuous. How far, time-wise, before the actual impact would Mr. Rickey and or Ms. Haskins been conspicuous to Mr. Taylor?
Objection, calls for speculation, lack of foundation.
Taking into account the fact that if for whatever reason he has not noticed that there are people in front of him up until the low beam headlights begin to make their way up their legs, and then allowing a 1 second interval because it's such a bright presentation, there will still be 1 1/4 seconds, or about 1 to 1 1/2 seconds of time during which it will be completely evident that there are human beings that his vehicle is about to run into.
Yeah, Mr. Taylor said he did not see either of them all the way through impact.
Objection, assumes facts not in evidence, calls for speculation.
That was his testimony in his deposition, that he did not see them, and both that and in the police report. The police statement was the same. I didn't see who I hit. I didn't know that I had hit somebody until after impact had occurred.
Did Mr. Taylor say if he applied his brakes at all before striking Mr. Rickey?
He was asked, and he said neither did he apply his brakes, nor did he even tap them and take the vehicle out of cruise control.
I want to ask you about Allison Haskins' clothing. Is there anything about Allison Haskins' clothing that would have aided in making at least her more noticeable to Mr. Taylor?
Yes. She was wearing,
Go ahead.
She was
I was going to
wearing-
ask you to pull up a picture,
Yep.
but why don't you go ahead and do that, and then I'll let you talk about that, please.
she was wearing light-colored blue jeans and a white top or a black top. And not being exactly aware of how the style was that she was wearing, the jeans are more important anyway because they're lower in the illumination pattern for the low beam headlights of Mr. Taylor's vehicle. Those jeans are probably 50% reflectant, meaning that they return a lot more light than the roadway does. And under all circumstances, Ms. Haskins, if she is illuminated by either the string of lights from the car dealership and or Mr. Taylor's vehicle, she will appear as a light object against a black background. And moving. As I said before, change is important. The motion draws your attention that there is something in the roadway going across in front of you. The black top, if she had it exposed, if it was the outermost garment on her upper part of her body, would not have shown up as a light object. It would have shown up as a dark silhouette against the other light sources we've talked about.
Can you show us that photograph?
Yes.
That'll be Exhibit 7.
Photograph number, I want to change which one here. Here we are. DSC, underline 0070 from Ms. Tharp's pictures that she took of the clothing.
And can you show us that for the video?
It is a photograph of a white top.
Objection. Oh, that's a gray top.
We have a gray card there. I'm not going to argue over colors.
It is, well,
A light colored top? Is that
it
fair
is
to
a
say?
lighter colored top than the gray card is here.
And that's a gray card.
This
What's
is
the
a
purpose of
photographic gray card, and it is very similar to this. In fact, it's not the exact same one. Kodak sells these cards. They are 18% reflective, and they control that it has no color. It is neither red nor pink nor blue nor green. It is just gray. The backside is about 95% reflective, but it is not controlled like the front is. So when you're taking a photograph and you want to measure the brightness and color of things, you put it in the photograph under the same lighting circumstances. This is that gray card set alongside of the clothing.
So go ahead and describe the clothing.
Clothing is, the jeans are light blue. The top is lighter colored than the gray card. And the black piece of clothing is quite black and would absorb a lot of light, is probably down in the area of 8 or 9% reflective. Whereas the jeans are going to be close to 50% and the top is 55 to 60%.
And do those clothes aid in noticeability of a pedestrian on the roadway?
They do. If she is available to Mr. Taylor's line of sight, able to be, that he can see in that direction, then she will appear much more conspicuously, much more noticeably, might be a better term, than Mr. Ricky would, because Mr. Ricky was wearing darker clothing as shown in the police scene photographs.
Okay. Now, Mr. Sobek, when you consult with the U.S. government, the local governments, private companies, and attorneys, I presume you charge for your time?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have office space that you have to pay for?
I suppose. I have an office that I rarely work in. I work out of my home office, but I have an office here, yes.
Wolf Technology has an office.
We do.
Maybe that's better ways to phrase it. Wolf Technology has office space. Do they also have employees?
Yes.
Okay. And have I agreed to pay you for your time at your usual hourly rate?
Yes, sir, you have.
And how much is your usual hourly rate?
$400 per hour.
Have the conclusions you've given today, are they stated to a reasonable degree of scientific and engineering certainty?
They are.
Can you please check the box accordingly on exhibit number 4? I'm sorry, exhibit number 2, beyond just a reasonable degree of medical certainty.
Not medical.
I'm sorry, strike that. I do. Beyond a reasonable degree of engineering certainty, are you in fact certain in your conclusions in this case?
I am.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Sobek.
Do you need it signed?
I do need it signed and dated, please.
What are we at, the 11th?
11, yeah. And have you in fact completed exhibit number 2?
I have.
Okay, I'll move for all those exhibits to be introduced into evidence.
And we will object.
Do you want to take a break? Or we'll,
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's take a break and then get to the rest of
We
it.
are going
Alright.
off the record at 2:15 p.m. We're back on the record at 2:27 p.m.
Mr. Sobek, this is actually one of 3 cases you are working for Mr. Martucci on at the current time, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And in fact, when your assistant went to Joplin, she did site investigations for all 3 of those.
She did. In fact, she actually did a site investigation on our 4th case that we had in the same area, not for the Martucci office, though.
Okay. And looking at what we've marked, these invoices that I've marked as defendants exhibits I and J, which you previously provided to me, it looks like that you were hired in about January 31st of 2014.
Yeah, I can't tell exactly. Our first contact was, as I said, on what's called the blue sheet in the file there.
Okay.
But we sent out a contract and it was returned and signed, and at that moment we consider ourselves to have been retained. And I don't know the actual date that the contract came back, but it was on the order of January 24th, perhaps through the 27th. Allison was reviewing the file material on the 27th.
Okay. And in fact, looking at the time that was billed by your company for those 2 months, it totals up over $2,000.
It will be. This total amount is going to end up being under $2,000 on these 2 invoices, $1,881. But by the time I get through with this deposition, it'll be over that.
And in fact, your time, the time you spent on this case that's shown on these 2 invoices, which total well, $1,881 plus $193.75, so just at $2,000. The total amount of time you spent on this case was 1/2 hour. Is that
Total
correct?
amount of time that I billed on this case. I actually spent more time talking with Allison, but this is a training process for her, and I don't put in all the time where I am doubling up on her time. I knew that I was very possibly going to be involved in the testimony on this, but I did not put in all the time that I spent. I suspect that there are another 2 or so hours in discussion about what I would want her to do at the site. In fact, there's some notes in the file that you've probably seen that she was making about the various tasks she was going to accomplish. So I think the actual time total billed on this case, or spent on the case, would probably be 2.5 to 3 hours on my part.
Okay. But on these 2 invoices, it shows that you spent 1/2 hour.
Yes, ma'am, it does.
And I believe that you have mentioned to me earlier that, well, in talking to Mr. Martucci, you said that you charge $400 per hour
For the regular engineering work, yes.
for your engineering work and $600 per hour for deposition and
Yes,
trial
ma'am.
work?
Yes. The
And-
actual time on the record.
Right. And 85% of your personal income comes from from doing work for attorneys, such as we're doing today. Is that right?
That's about right.
And in doing your work on this case, you did not go back and rely on anything that you've published before. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. But in fact, I saw on your CV, and in fact, you had told me earlier that you wrote an article called Litigating the Shadows.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, I co-wrote that along with a plaintiff's attorney out of, I think he was out of Jacksonville at that time.
Okay. So James R. Holland is a plaintiff's attorney?
He is.
Okay. And I'm assuming that you would consider that to be a reliable and authoritative paper on the issues it discusses?
Yes.
And so a person reading it could rely on those opinions and facts and conclusions?
Yes.
We'll mark this as exhibit. I. Oh, J, H-I-J-K, exhibit K. And Mr. Sobek, we'd also talked earlier about that you have given a number of depositions over the years, and the number of depositions that you have given for plaintiff's attorneys as opposed to defense attorneys is about 3 to 1. Would that be correct?
Maybe closer to 4 to 1. I haven't looked at the math recently. Yeah, closer to 3.
Okay. And the amount of trial testimony is about is 87 from the course of February of '89 through March of 2014. You'd given 87. You'd testified 87 times for the plaintiff and what is
36.
I'm sorry, 36 for the defendant.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And in fact, there have been a few cases over the years in which the courts have not allowed you to testify as to your opinions. Isn't that correct?
I have had this question before, and I don't know which ones you might be referring to. There may have been some areas where there was not going to be any testimony allowed on that subject on either side. I can think of one that was later reversed. I know of another case where the judge, this is a bench trial, and the judge, as I understand that process, was functioning as the juror, the final arbiter at least, and he didn't agree with my opinions, but I was allowed to testify.
But if there's reported cases out there that show that a court disallowed your testimony, that would be the best.
I'd have to read them.
I'd object on the grounds that that may have been overturned on appeal, as he just described. Go ahead.
I would have to read them to know if I agreed with the term that you're using would not allow my testimony. I take your question to mean, for example, was not allowed to testify because the court didn't deem that I was an expert in that field. To my knowledge, that's never happened.
But courts have disallowed your testimony on the grounds that the facts upon which, or the bases upon which you were attempting to testify were not sufficiently grounded in facts.
I do not know of any case that that's true.
Now, in the diagram that you put on the board earlier, you're not claiming that that is drawn to scale, are you?
Oh, absolutely not. In fact, I mentioned that I think maybe the string of lights is too high in that drawing.
But really nothing on that drawing is drawn to scale.
It's not drawn to scale. It is representative of the perspective view that a motorist in the right-hand lane would have. And I took it in the basic angles from one of the photographs that Allison Tharp took as she drove through the scene.
And you have no knowledge of what traffic was actually coming towards Mr. Taylor as he was driving westbound, do you?
No, he said that there were eastbound vehicles, but he didn't say how many and the specific angle that they were at with respect to his point of view.
And we don't know what distance they were and to the west.
All we know is that they were west according to his testimony, as opposed to behind him over east of him.
And you told us that you determined the cloud cover based on looking at a satellite image 1 hour before
That's correct.
this accident, right?
Yes. Yes.
Looking at the photographs, particularly Exhibit 3 that you pulled up earlier, in that photograph, you'll agree that vehicle is being illuminated by either car lights or spotlights or something. That is not, does not show just the light that's there on the highway.
I will absolutely agree with that. This is a flash photograph, and the flash is mounted on top of the officer's camera.
And you also agree that where that car is parked is not where the impact occurred.
I will agree with that too.
And you'll agree also that the reflective guide lights, I think you referred to them as being on the median post.
In the guide rail,
Right.
yes, cable guide rail.
Those are not lights, are they? They are reflectors.
They are reflectors, but they are characterized in the same units as light. You can have a lamp, for example, this flashlight, and it will be rated in so many candela. And the reflectors are rated in so many candela per foot candle of incident light upon them, and they behave like lights.
But the question is, they are not lights.
That's correct.
And you did not do any measurements to determine what candela they reflect.
I did not.
And you did not do any measurements of the light at the scene to determine how many candelas of light were on the pavement as a result of the car dealership.
Correction of terms, how many foot candles, and you are correct, I did not.
And you did not do any measurements using any sort of scientific devices or measurement devices to determine how much ambient light there was on the pavement
No.
from the sky.
I would not agree. Oh, from the sky? I don't mean to quibble, but I need to understand what you mean by the term scientific devices. It is true that I did not put a light meter out there and measure the amount of light coming from the sky.
Right.
But I used a scientific program that is well documented and repeatable by anybody who chooses to about what the position of the sun was and what the amount of illumination arriving at the scene would be from the sky, because the sky over Joplin at that time was clear.
And that's assuming that it was clear that there was no clouds.
That's correct.
And you assumed in your calculation, in your conclusions, you assumed that the pedestrians crossed the highway at a 90-degree angle to the highway. A straight shot.
I did assume that, and my opinions would not change substantially even if they deviated from that path 30 degrees toward the east or 30 degrees toward the west, because it would not substantially change the overall time frame. If they get much more than that, it's going to lengthen the time frame that they're out there in providing these cues.
But we don't know what direction or what path they took.
Everything leads me to believe that they went straight across. That's how I interpret it.
Okay. And what did you interpret that based on?
Ms. Haskins' statement and the police officer's indication that they were crossing the highway. I've had to cross highways before, and unless they are completely abandoned and no traffic coming, I will go the shortest route.
And all of your conclusions are based upon the facts that you have assumed as you have told them to us in your direct testimony?
Objection, overbroad, vague and ambiguous.
I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I think I can.
Well, let me rephrase the question. I'm not trying to confuse you. You have made some conclusions,
I have.
and you told us the basis of your conclusions.
Yes, ma'am.
And those facts or opinions that you stated as the basis of your conclusions, that is what you have relied on to support the conclusions.
Yes.
So if there were other facts or that developed at trial, those might change your conclusions.
It would depend on.
Hold on. Objection that lacks foundation, calls for speculation without knowing what those facts are. Go ahead.
That's where I was going to go next. It would depend on what changed. For example, if I learned that one of those median cable guide reflectors was missing, that would not change my opinions. If I learned that they were all put on from after the collision, that somebody magically went out there and put all those on before the police took the photographs, that would change my opinion relative to those cable guides. That didn't happen, I'm sure. If somebody told me that the lights were not on at the car dealership, that they were somehow turned on after this incident, that would have some influence on my opinions. I have no reason to believe that that's true.
Mr. Sobek, we can agree that a person driving on an interstate highway at night does not expect to see pedestrians.
We can agree with that, yes.
And we know that Mr. Ricky and Ms. Haskins could see the headlights of the westbound cars way into the distance.
Yes, ma'am.
And we know that they chose to cross the highway seeing those headlights coming.
Believing that they had enough time. That was their statement, or her statement at least.
But we know that they crossed the highway
Yes.
and they knew that there was cars coming.
Yes.
That's all I have at this time.
Mr. Sobek, you were asked if a driver on the highway would expect to see pedestrians, and you stated no. Is that correct?
In the overall, the way the question was asked, I would state no.
Okay. Whether a driver expects to see pedestrians or not, does it change the fact that Mr. Ricky and Ms. Haskins were noticeable to a westbound driver from a distance of 530 feet?
Objection calls for speculation.
Is that, I didn't hear the question part of that.
Let me change it. Whether pedestrians are expected on the roadway or not, would it still be noticeable to a westbound driver from a distance of 530 feet that Mr. Ricky and Ms. Haskins are crossing the roadway in front of them?
Yes.
Objection calls for speculation, lack of
ahead.
foundation.
Yeah, the answer is yes.
Okay. You were asked if there are any other cases that you have been asked to review for my firm. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you said there were 3?
Yes.
Is it correct that one of those cases, well, in each of those cases that I asked you to give me your fair, objective, unbiased opinion,
You did.
whether that's hurtful or helpful to me?
You did.
And in one of those cases, have you told me you really can't help me?
I did.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Anything further?
This marks the end of videotape number 3 in the deposition of James Sobek. We're off the record at 2:45 p.m.